I still remember that night. The city lights were glowing softly, reflecting in the wet streets after a light evening rain. The air was cool, and a faint smell of roasted coffee and fresh bread filled the streets as people walked by laughing and talking. Inside the restaurant, the warm lights made everything feel cozy, almost like stepping into a safe little world. The chatter of other diners mixed with soft background music created a calm, peaceful atmosphere. It was supposed to be a happy evening, a celebration of a birthday, but from the moment he stepped inside, something felt slightly off. He had been excited all day, waiting for this dinner. Friends had promised to be there. The table was booked at his favorite restaurant, and he could almost taste the rich food that was soon to come. He could hear the clinking of glasses as he walked through the doors, and the scent of food made his stomach growl. There was a soft hum of conversation, but among all that, he noticed Hertha Waitress. She seemed ordinary at first, moving from table to table with a polite smile. But when their eyes met, she looked at him with a strange intensity, almost as if she knew something he didn't. He shook off the uneasy feeling and approached the table, where his friends were waiting. They were laughing, sharing jokes, and his heart felt lighter for a moment. They all greeted him with hugs, and the birthday wishes began. There were small gifts, a few balloons, and a cake waiting at the corner of the table. The room felt festive, warm, and he could almost forget that strange look the waitress had given him. For a while, it seemed like it was going to be an ordinary, joyful birthday dinner. As everyone settled in, the waitress came over to take their order. She was polite, friendly, but something in her tone made him pause. She leaned slightly closer and said in a low voice, almost like a whisper, "Don't drink that." At first he thought she was joking, or perhaps warning him about the drink he had chosen. He laughed softly, nodding, thinking it was just part of her personality. But the way she said it wasn't normal. There was a hint of fear in her eyes, a warning buried deep in her words. The group continued their conversation, and he tried to ignore the warning, dismissing it as a strange coincidence. The food arrived, and the aroma of roasted chicken, fresh herbs, and warm bread filled the air. He picked up his glass, a bright cocktail with sparkling ice and a slice of lemon on the rim. He was about to take a sip when he noticed the waitress glancing back at him from across the room. Her eyes were wide now, her hands slightly trembling as if she was trying to stop him from doing something. Maybe she's just clumsy, he thought, trying to convince himself. He smiled politely at her, and she nodded back, still looking worried. But inside, a small voice in his mind began to whisper doubt. Why would a stranger care so much about his drink? He felt a strange chill run down his spine, but he told himself it was nothing, just nerves, just imagination. He took a small sip anyway. The taste was sweet and tangy, nothing unusual at first. But then, very quickly, he felt something change. His head started spinning, and a cold sweat ran down his neck. The music in the restaurant seemed to fade. The chatter of other diners became distant, almost muffled. He blinked and tried to focus on his friends, who were still laughing and talking, unaware of the sudden panic rising inside him. He tried to stand, to call for help, but his legs felt heavy, unsteady. His vision blurred, and he could barely make out the outlines of the people around him. That's when he realized he had made a terrible mistake. The waitress's warning echoed in his mind. "Don't drink that." No, too late. He understood she had been trying to protect him from something he couldn't yet see. His friends noticed he was struggling and leaned in, asking if he was okay. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. He felt a sudden fear, an intense, crushing panic. Something in the drink was wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. His heart pounded, his breaths came fast and shallow. And the restaurant that had felt warm and safe a few moments ago now seemed distant. Strange, almost unreal. The waitress appeared at his side almost instantly. She had set down a tray on a nearby table, and now she knelt beside him, her eyes wide with urgency. "You have to get out of here," she whispered, her voice trembling. He tried to stand, but the room tilted violently, throwing him against the chair. She grabbed his arm and pulled him up, guiding him toward the door. His friends shouted, trying to reach him, but their voices seemed far away. The sounds were muffled, distorted, like he was underwater. Outside, The cool night air hit him like a shock, and he felt some of the dizziness ease. The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick and shiny under the streetlights. The air smelled of wet pavement and something faintly metallic, almost like fear. The waitress led him to a quiet corner, away from the busy streets, where she finally spoke clearly, her voice almost shaking with intensity. "You weren't supposed to drink that," she said, glancing back toward the restaurant. "Something was put in your drink. I saw it happen. You could have. You don't even want to imagine what could have happened." His mind raced, trying to process her words. His hands were still trembling and his chest felt tight. The fear, the shock, the sudden sense of danger was overwhelming. He looked back at the restaurant through the glass windows. The party was still going on, oblivious to what had almost happened. The waitress's warning, her eyes, everything she had said, it all made sense now. But it didn't make it any less terrifying. He leaned against the wall, trying to calm down. His thoughts were scattered, trying to understand why someone would do this. What was in his drink, and why he had been targeted? The waitress stayed close, silently watching him. Her expression a mix of worry and relief. For a moment he felt grateful, then suddenly guilty for not listening sooner, for ignoring the warning that had been so clear from the beginning. And then, just as he thought the worst was over, a movement caught his eye. From the corner of the street, a shadow emerged, moving quickly toward them. The figure was tall, wearing dark clothes, and his steps were deliberate, purposeful. A sudden sense of dread filled him again. The adrenaline that had been calming now surged back, sharp and frightening. Before he could react, the figure stopped, just a few meters away, and looked directly at him. He felt a chill run down his spine, a feeling that something much bigger than just a ruined drink was happening. The night that had started with laughter, celebration, and cake had transformed into something dark and dangerous in just a few minutes. And he realized with a sinking heart that this was only the beginning. I still remember that night. After the shadow stopped a few meters away, the man standing there didn't speak. He just stared, and the cold weight of his gaze pressed down on everything around. The streetlights flickered above, casting strange moving shadows across the wet pavement. Every small sound, the distant honking of cars, a dog barking somewhere far away. Faint rustle of leaves felt amplified, like the city itself was holding its breath. The birthday celebration that had started with laughter, clinking glasses, and cheerful chatter seemed like a distant memory. Now the air was thick with fear. He tried to calm himself, focusing on his breathing, but the fear inside his chest refused to settle. His heart pounded so loudly it felt like it could be heard by the stranger across the street. The waitress stayed close, her hand lightly on his arm, grounding him, reminding him that he wasn't alone. "You need to move," she whispered, her voice urgent but soft. He nodded, still trying to process everything. How could a simple birthday dinner turn into something like this? How could one drink, one moment of ignoring a warning, bring him to this? The shadowed figure started walking slowly toward him, deliberate steps echoing faintly on the wet pavement. He tried to look for help, for anyone who might see what was happening, but the street was empty. The restaurants had closed, the crowds had gone home, and only a few cars passed by, their headlights briefly illuminating the dark streets. He realized how alone he truly was, and the reality hit him like a cold wave. Someone had wanted to hurt him, and he had narrowly escaped. The waitress pulled him behind a corner, near a small alley, out of the line of sight of the approaching figure. He pressed himself against the wall, listening as the footsteps drew closer, then slowed, and finally stopped. The man's shadow stretched across the wall, tall and threatening. He could feel the danger, sharp and immediate, and his mind raced with questions. Who was this man? Why had he targeted him? And how had the waitress known in time to warn him? "Think he's waiting for someone?" the waitress whispered. Her eyes darted nervously, scanning the street. "Maybe he didn't expect me to interfere, but now he knows something." She paused, her face pale. "We need to get out of here, now. Before he figures out where we are." He nodded, swallowing hard. Fear made his throat dry, and his hands shook uncontrollably. The adrenaline pumping through his veins made him feel both weak and strong at the same time. He tried to steady himself, but every nerve in his body screamed at him to run, to escape. The quiet alley offered a small sense of safety, but it felt fragile, like glass that could shatter at any moment. The waitress grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the side street, away from the main road. They moved quickly but quietly, sticking to the shadows, listening for any sign that they were being followed. Each step felt heavy. Every sound made his heart jump. The stranger's footsteps seemed to echo behind them occasionally, but whenever they looked back, the street appeared empty. He didn't know if it was fear making him imagine things, or if the man had disappeared and was now watching from a distance. As they walked, the waitress spoke in hurried whispers. "You don't understand. This isn't random. Someone wanted to poison you tonight. I saw it happen when you weren't looking. There was a man. He slipped something into your drink while you were distracted. I barely got here in time." He felt his stomach twist. Poison. Someone had tried to kill him at his own birthday dinner. His friends, the people he trusted, were still inside, completely unaware of the danger. He felt a rush of panic and guilt. Why hadn't he listened to the warning? Why had he ignored the instinct that told him something was wrong? They continued moving through the dim streets, and the city's lights seemed less friendly now, more threatening. The once bright streets, that had seemed full of life during the evening, now felt eerie and menacing. He could hear faint footsteps behind them again, sometimes near, sometimes far, but he couldn't be sure. Each time he glanced over his shoulder, the darkness seemed empty, yet the feeling of being watched never left him. "Do you have a car?" he asked, his voice low, almost trembling. He knew they needed to get somewhere safe, away from the streets and away from whoever was trying to hurt him. "Yes," she replied. "Parked a few blocks away. But we have to be careful. If he's following us, he might see us get in the car. And then, I don't even want to think about that." They turned another corner, moving faster now, their steps almost silent on the wet pavement. He felt trapped, like the city itself had become a maze designed to keep him cornered. The adrenaline was exhausting, but fear gave him strength. He wanted to run, to scream, to find help, but there was no one. Just him, the waitress, and the shadowed figure somewhere behind or ahead. He couldn't tell. Suddenly, the waitress stopped. She pressed him against the wall and gestured for him to stay quiet. A low, steady hum of an engine came from the street ahead. A car's headlights flashed briefly across the wet pavement. She checked the street, then pulled him forward again, ducking behind a parked car. He could feel the cool metal against his back, the rainwater dripping faintly from the roof above. His heart pounded so hard that it felt like it might burst from his chest. "Almost there," she whispered. "Just a little further." As they moved forward again, a sudden movement from the shadows made him freeze. The tall figure appeared. Again, now on the sidewalk directly ahead of them, blocking the path to the car. His face was partially hidden by the brim of a dark hat, but his eyes were sharp, cold, and unyielding. He didn't speak, but the presence was enough to make the blood drain from his face. The waitress grabbed his hand and pulled him back, her grip tight and urgent. "We have to find another way," she said. "He's expecting us to go straight. We need to be unpredictable. Do you trust me?" He nodded, too afraid to speak. Trust was all he had now. Fear had replaced every other thought. Streets, once familiar, had become a trap, and the man standing there was proof that the danger was real, immediate, and deliberate. He had never felt so vulnerable in his life. Every step now required caution. Every sound made him jump. He knew they couldn't afford a single mistake. And then, just as they turned into a narrow alley to escape, he heard a faint, metallic click behind him. The sound was so small, almost imperceptible, but it made his blood run cold. He turned just in time to see the man raise something in his hand, a weapon, glinting faintly in the dim light. Panic surged through him. They were trapped, cornered by someone who clearly meant to harm him. The adrenaline that had been his friend until now became a wildfire of fear. He could barely think, barely breathe. The waitress tugged him forward, urging him to move faster, but the space was too narrow, the shadow too close. I still remember that night. The narrow alley was dark and cold, damp from the evening rain that had left puddles along the edges of the cracked pavement. The only light came from a flickering street lamp at the far end, casting strange moving shadows that danced like ghosts across the walls. Every sound felt magnified, the distant barking of a dog, the faint hum of a car engine somewhere in the distance, the occasional drip of water from a broken pipe. But over all of it, the one sound that terrified him most was the soft, deliberate footsteps behind them. The man with the weapon was moving slowly, carefully, like a predator enjoying the fear he had created. He pressed himself closer to the wall, his heart hammering, trying not to make a sound. The waitress's hand was still tight around his arm, grounding him. But even her presence didn't calm the panic rising inside him. He could feel his knees shaking, his chest tightening with every breath. Fear had wrapped itself around him like a cold, suffocating blanket. And he realized that running wasn't just instinct, it was survival. "Stay calm," the waitress whispered urgently. "We need to think. Don't make sudden moves. We have to get out of this alley." He nodded, barely able to focus. His mind raced through possibilities: escape through the streets, hide somewhere, maybe call the police, but each idea seemed impossible in the moment. The weapon still raised in the shadow behind them made everything immediate, urgent, and terrifying. They were trapped, cornered by someone who had clearly planned this. They moved slowly, carefully, sticking to the shadows, trying to find a side street that would lead them away from the dangerous figure. Every step felt like walking on a tightrope over a pit of fire. One wrong move, and everything could be over. The puddles reflected the dim light, making the alley seem even longer and more dangerous. He stumbled slightly over a small stone, and the waitress grabbed his arm to steady him. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear, but also determination. "Almost there," she whispered. "Just a little further, and we can get out." But the man behind them was clever. He didn't rush, didn't shout, didn't make a sound, but the presence was oppressive, like a shadow that would not let them pass. He could feel it closing in, the danger growing with each second. And then, just as they thought they had a small chance of escape, the man made a sudden movement, stepping into the faint light. The glint of the weapon reflected in his eyes, and a cold wave of terror swept over him. They ducked behind a large dumpster, pressing themselves against the cold metal. The smell of garbage was strong, but he barely noticed. All he could focus on was the figure standing just a few meters away, scanning the alley like a hunter searching for prey. The fear made his stomach twist, his hands shake, and his head spin. How had his birthday, a night meant for joy, turned into something that felt like a nightmare from which he couldn't wake? The waitress peered around the edge of the dumpster, her eyes narrowing. "We need to distract him," she whispered. "I'll make a sound. You run to the end of the alley. We have to risk it." He hesitated, fear freezing him in place. What if he couldn't finish the sentence? He didn't want to imagine what might happen if they failed. "You don't have a choice," she said, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. "Trust me now." Before he could react, she kicked a small trash can, sending it clattering loudly against the wall. The noise echoed through the alley like a gunshot. The man's head snapped toward the sound, his posture tense, eyes scanning for the source. That moment, that split second, was all they needed. She grabbed his arm and pulled him forward, urging him to run as fast as he could. He ran blindly, slipping slightly on the wet pavement, adrenaline fueling his legs. Every step, every heartbeat was a battle against fear. He could hear the man shouting behind them now, a deep, threatening voice that sent chills down his spine. The alley twisted and turned, narrow and claustrophobic, and he felt trapped, like there was no escape. But he ran anyway, driven by pure instinct. Desperate to survive, at the end of the alley, they saw a faint light of street leading to a busier road, The sight of it gave him a small glimmer of hope. Maybe they could blend into the crowd, disappear, and finally be safe. But just as they were about to reach it, the man appeared in front of them, blocking the exit. He froze, panic surging like a tidal wave. The man's face was now fully visible in the dim light, a cold, cruel expression that made his blood run cold. The weapon was still in his hand, and it gleamed faintly under the flickering streetlight. The alley that had seemed like a path to freedom had become a trap, and he realized, with a sickening feeling, that there was no easy escape. "Stop right there," the man said, his voice low, dangerous, and calm at the same time. It was a voice that demanded obedience, that carried the weight of threat. "You're not going anywhere." The waitress stepped in front of him, shielding him as best she could. "You don't want to do this," she said, her voice steady but firm. "Just walk away. Leave him alone." The man laughed, a cold, short laugh that echoed off the alley walls. "It's too late for warnings," he said. He should have listened at the restaurant. Fear tightened around him like a vice. His chest felt heavy, his stomach churned, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. This was it, the moment he had feared since the warning at the restaurant. Everything led to this. His birthday dinner, the poisoned drink, the shadowed figure. The alley all came together now in one terrifying moment. Suddenly, from behind the man, a loud crash echoed through the alley. Metal hit metal, and the stranger's attention snapped toward the sound. The momentary distraction gave them a small opening. And without thinking, the waitress grabbed his hand and pulled him to the side, away from the exit and deeper into a narrow, darker path. The air smelled of wet stone and decay, and he could barely see where they were going, but he ran anyway, driven by desperation as they disappeared into the shadows. The man's voice called out behind them, angry and frustrated. "You can't escape me. You're mine." But the darkness swallowed them, hiding them from sight for the moment. His chest heaved, lungs burning, and every part of his body screamed in exhaustion and fear. He realized they were far from safe, but the immediate threat was temporarily behind them. The waitress pressed him against a wall, panting, trying to catch her breath. "We have to keep moving," she said urgently. "This is just the beginning. Whoever he is, he won't stop. And I think he has more friends, more people. We can't stay here." Kay nodded, terrified but trusting her. Every instinct in his body screamed for safety, but the city felt like a maze designed to trap them. The night that had begun with laughter, birthday cake, and friends was now consumed by fear, running, and the unknown. I still remember that night. The streets had grown even darker, narrower and colder as they moved further away from the restaurant. The rain from earlier had left puddles on the asphalt, reflecting the dim glow of distant streetlights like tiny, trembling mirrors. Every shadow seemed alive, shifting and stretching in the corners of his vision. His chest ached from running, his legs burned, and fear made his heart pound so hard he thought it might burst. But he kept moving because he had no choice. He had to survive. The waitress led him down an alley that smelled of damp stone and rotting garbage. Her hand was still gripping his tightly, grounding him, giving him courage even as panic tried to take over. Her eyes scanned every corner, every shadow, searching for danger. "We have to find somewhere safe," she whispered, her voice tense. "Somewhere he can't find us." He nodded, but he barely noticed the words. All he could think about was the man, the weapon, the way he had blocked their path. The stranger had a presence that was terrifying, deliberate, and methodical. Someone had planned this carefully. He realized that now. The poisoned drink, the chase, the shadows, it wasn't random. Someone wanted to hurt him, and that thought made his stomach churn with fear as they turned another corner. He heard something move ahead of them, soft, almost inaudible footsteps. He froze, pressing himself against the wall. His heart leaped into his throat. This was worse than before. Now there was more than one figure waiting for them. The waitress glanced at him and nodded, signaling for him to stay calm. They moved slowly, cautiously, trying to avoid being seen. The soft tapping of their shoes on the wet pavement seemed deafening. Every instinct screamed that they could be spotted at any moment. Suddenly, a shadow lunged from the side street ahead. The waitress yanked him back just in time. He stumbled, almost falling, and a sharp, fearful gasp escaped him. The shadow disappeared into the darkness as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the sound of their rapid breathing and pounding hearts. He realized that the city, which had once felt familiar and safe, had become a maze filled with invisible dangers. "They're everywhere," the waitress said quietly, fear creeping into her voice. "I think they've been watching since the restaurant. Whoever wants you dead didn't act alone. You're a target, and we're running out of time." He couldn't believe her words. A target? Who would want him dead? What had he done to deserve this? His mind raced, trying to make sense of the chaos, but the fear was too strong to think clearly. All he could do was follow her lead, trust her instincts, and hope they could survive the night. As they moved deeper into the maze of streets, he noticed faint shapes moving in the distance. Figures cloaked in darkness, barely visible, watching, waiting. Each time he tried to focus, the shapes seemed to vanish, only to reappear a few meters ahead or behind. It was like they were being hunted by ghosts. Shadows that slipped in and out of the corners of reality. They ducked into another alley, narrower and darker than the last. The walls pressed in on both sides, dripping water onto the pavement. The darkness was thick, suffocating, and he felt a wave of panic rise inside him. His legs were trembling, his chest tight, and every nerve in his body screamed to stop, to hide, to give up. But the waitress's hand held him steady. Her eyes, fierce and determined, gave him the courage to keep moving. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps grew louder behind them. Someone was following closely. He dared to glance back, but all he could see was darkness. The footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoed in the alley. The realization hit him: this wasn't just the man from before. There were more people, and they were closing in. Fear turned to terror, and adrenaline surged through his body, making him run faster. Even though every step threatened to make him stumble, they reached the end of the alley and saw a faint light, a small convenience store with glass windows fogged by condensation. The glow of the fluorescent lights inside was a small beacon in the surrounding darkness. "We can hide there," the waitress said urgently. "Just for a moment. Then we'll figure out our next move." They ran across the slick pavement, hearts pounding, and slipped inside the store. The bell above the door jingled softly, and the clerk looked up, startled. For a few seconds they were safe, hidden in plain sight. He leaned against the counter, gasping for breath, feeling the fear slowly drain out of him just a little. But the relief was short-lived. Through the fogged windows, he could see shadows gathering outside. Figures moving silently along the street, watching, waiting. The realization struck him like ice. They weren't safe yet. The city that had once felt like home had turned into a trap, and the people hunting them were patient, relentless, and clever. The waitress pulled him to a corner behind some shelves, whispering urgently, "Listen to me. They're not going to stop. Whoever they are, they have a plan. We need to move again, now, before they realize we're here. We can't stay anywhere too long." He nodded, swallowing hard, trying to steady his trembling hands. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to run, to escape, to survive. But even as he listened, he realized something else. This was no ordinary attack. Someone had been planning this for days, maybe weeks. The poisoned drink at his birthday dinner was only the beginning. The chase, the shadows, the mysterious figures, it all pointed to a larger, more terrifying truth. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed outside. He jumped, heart leaping into his throat. The shadows outside froze, then disappeared into the darkness. The street fell silent, but the tension didn't leave. The city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. The waitress looked at him, her face pale but determined. "We can't wait here," she said. "They'll come back. We need to find a safe place somewhere no one knows. But first, we need to figure out who wants you dead and why." He nodded silently, fear and confusion twisting inside him. The night that had begun with cake, laughter, and friends had become a nightmare of shadows, weapons, and unknown enemies. Every step, every decision, every second counted, and he realized that the danger was far from over. Whoever had planned this was still out there waiting, and the next move could decide whether they lived or died. I still remember that night. The streets outside the convenience store were darker than ever, narrow and nearly empty. Rain had left slick puddles that reflected the dim glow of distant streetlights. Every step they took echoed against the brick walls, making him jump at every sound. His chest heaved from running, and his legs felt like lead, but he knew they had to keep moving. One wrong step, 1 second of hesitation, and the people chasing them could catch up. The waitress held his hand firmly, guiding him through side streets and back alleys. Her face was pale, lips pressed together, eyes scanning every shadow. "We have to be faster," she whispered. "They're not just following, they're planning something. Whoever wants you dead, they're organized. And they know this city better than we do." He nodded, fear gripping him so tightly that it felt like his heart could stop at any moment. The adrenaline pumping through him made his legs move almost automatically. But even as he ran, his mind screamed questions. Who were they? Why him? Was it personal or random? He couldn't find answers, only more fear. Twisting inside him like a dark knot, they turned a corner and ducked into a narrow alley between two old buildings. The walls were covered in moss, damp and cold to the touch. The air smelled of wet stone and mildew. He pressed himself against the wall, trying to slow his breathing, but the fear refused to let him. Every small sound, distant footsteps, a car horn. The rustling of a plastic bag made him jump. From the shadows, a faint movement caught his eye. He froze, heart thudding painfully. A figure stepped into view, tall, dark, deliberate. It was one of them, the men who had tried to hurt him at the birthday dinner. He could see the glint of a weapon in the dim light. Panic surged through him, sharp and cold. The waitress grabbed his arm, her grip tight, and whispered, "Go." Now they ran again, slipping through the twisting alleys, hearts pounding, legs burning. The city felt like a maze, one designed to trap them. He realized that no matter how fast they ran, the danger was always close. The footsteps followed, never stopping, never slowing. Like a relentless shadow, as they turned another corner, they stumbled onto a quiet, empty street. A single street lamp flickered overhead. For a brief moment they felt a tiny sense of relief. Maybe they had lost them. Maybe for a few seconds they could breathe, but that relief vanished instantly. From the darkness, another figure stepped forward, blocking their path. This one was different. Taller, broader, moving with confidence, eyes sharp and cold. The weapon in his hand glinted faintly in the dim light. Panic and fear flooded him all at once. He realized that they were no longer just running, they were being hunted. The waitress pushed him behind a trash bin, trying to hide them in the shadows. Her hands were trembling, but her eyes were fierce. "We have to fight this," she whispered. "We can't just run forever. There's a safe place nearby, but we need to get there now." He nodded, shaking, chest tight with fear, but the thought of stopping, of being caught, terrified him more. Together, they moved silently, quickly, using every shadow, every corner, every wall to hide their presence. But the streets felt like a trap. Every turn, every alley, every corner seemed to bring new danger. New shadows, new threats. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the night. It was faint but clear, and it sent a shiver down his spine. The figures in the darkness paused, then moved with urgency, splitting up, surrounding them from multiple directions. Fear exploded in his chest. They had planned this. They had coordinated this. Escape was no longer just about running, it was about survival. The waitress tugged him toward a narrow staircase leading down to a subway station. The steps were slippery, and he almost fell, but she caught him just in time. "Hurry," she urged. "We have to get underground. They won't follow us there easily. Come on." They descended quickly, the noise of their footsteps echoing off the walls. The air grew colder, damp, and smelled faintly of metal and dust. It was dark, almost completely, except for the faint emergency lights along the stairwell. Every step felt like a risk. Every shadow seemed to hide another danger. But the subway promised safety, or at least A temporary escape. At the bottom of the stairs, they slipped into a maintenance corridor hidden from the main platform. The faint hum of distant trains echoed through the tunnels. The dim light of the corridor flickered, casting shadows that seemed alive. He pressed himself against the wall, chest heaving, every muscle trembling from fear and exhaustion. "We can rest for a moment," the waitress said, voice low but steady. "But we have to be careful. They might follow us here. We're not safe yet. Not even close." He nodded silently, swallowing hard. Every instinct screamed that the danger was far from over. Whoever had planned this had resources, patience, and strategy. The poison drink was just the beginning. The chase through the streets was just part of their plan. The thought made him shiver with terror. And then, faint sound reached his ears, the soft, almost imperceptible click of a door opening somewhere deeper in the tunnel. He froze, heart leaping into his throat. The sound was deliberate, slow, and terrifyingly close. Someone was coming. I still remember that night. The underground tunnel was dark, cold, and damp. The walls smelled of wet stone and rusted metal, and the faint hum of distant trains echoed eerily around them. Every step they took sent tiny echoes through the narrow corridor, making their presence known to anyone listening. His heart was pounding so fast he could feel it in his throat. The fear from the streets above had followed them here, relentless and suffocating. The waitress led him quickly along the corridor, her hand gripping his tightly. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp, alert, scanning every shadow. "We have to stay quiet," she whispered. "They re-smart. They won't just follow us blindly. They'll try to trap us." He nodded, his chest tight, muscles trembling from exhaustion and fear. He had never felt so vulnerable in his life. The city had turned into a labyrinth, a trap designed to corner him at every turn. His birthday, which should have been filled with laughter and celebration, had become a nightmare, a test of endurance and survival, as they moved deeper into the tunnel. The faint sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Someone was following, and the sound made his blood run cold. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, calculated. Whoever was behind them wasn't panicking. They were confident, methodical, and patient. He realized that these people were professionals, or at least very organized. The poison drink at the restaurant, the shadows in the streets, the pursuit underground had all been planned. The waitress led him into a maintenance room, small and dimly lit, with a single flickering bulb overhead. Shelves lined the walls filled with tools and cleaning supplies. She pressed herself against the wall, signaling him to stay low. "We can rest for a moment," she whispered, "but we have to be ready. They won't stop." He sank to the floor, heart hammering, trying to catch his breath. Every nerve in his body was on edge. The fear, the adrenaline, the exhaustion, it was overwhelming. He felt tears prick his eyes, but he swallowed them back. He couldn't cry now, not when danger was still so close. The waitress pulled a small flashlight from her bag and shone it quietly around the room. She checked the door, the small window, every possible entrance. "We need to figure out what they want," she said softly. "Why would someone try to kill you at your birthday? Who could hate you that much?" He shook his head, trying to make sense of the chaos. "I don't understand," he whispered. "I haven't done anything. I don't know why they would." His voice trailed off, swallowed by fear. She placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "We'll figure it out. But first, we have to survive the night." Suddenly, a faint noise reached their ears, the soft scraping of metal against concrete. He froze, straining to listen. The sound was slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly close. Someone was moving through the tunnels, and they were getting nearer. His pulse leaped into his throat, every muscle tensed. "They've found us." The waitress whispered, her voice low but urgent. "We have to move. Now." They crept to the back of the maintenance room, through a narrow service door leading into another corridor. The walls here were older, rough stone, damp and slick. The dim light barely reached them. Every step was silent, careful, but the sound of pursuit was getting louder. Echoing in the tunnels, he felt panic clawing at his chest. The fear was no longer just about being caught. It was about the unknown. Who were these people? Why were they after him? How far would they go? The answers eluded him, leaving only terror in their place as they moved through the narrow passage. He noticed faint markings on the walls, small scratches, symbols he couldn't understand. The waitress saw them too and paused. "These are warnings," she said quietly. "They're letting us know we're being watched, that every move is being tracked. Whoever is after us, they're everywhere." His stomach twisted with dread. He realized the night was far from over. The danger wasn't just immediate, it was all around him, invisible but constant. He felt trapped, hunted, and vulnerable in a way he had never experienced before. Suddenly, from the shadows ahead, a low, harsh whisper echoed. "You can't escape." "It's too late." He jumped, nearly losing his footing. The sound was close, deliberate, and terrifying. The words carried a weight that made his blood run cold. The presence of someone so near, so certain of their power, made him realize just how fragile their safety was. The waitress grabbed his arm, pulling him into a narrow alcove, hidden from sight. "We need to find another exit," she whispered urgently. "This tunnel leads deeper, but it also leads to danger. There's a service ladder nearby that goes to an abandoned platform. If we can reach it, we might get out of the tunnels. But we have to move carefully." He nodded, terror coiling inside him like a snake. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide, but he knew that staying still was just as dangerous. They had to move. They had no choice as they crept through the tunnel toward the ladder. The faint sound of footsteps followed, echoing, constant, and growing nearer. He felt trapped between fear and exhaustion. And a sudden thought hit him with icy clarity. Whoever had planned this night had thought of everything. Every escape route, every alley, every corner, they had calculated it. He realized that survival would not just require speed or courage, it would require wits, luck, and perhaps a little help from someone he couldn't yet trust. I still remember that night. The tunnel air was cold and thick with the smell of damp stone and rust. Every sound, the distant hum of trains, the faint dripping of water. The echo of their own footsteps was amplified, making it impossible to ignore. Fear had wrapped itself around him like a heavy cloak, and every nerve in his body screamed danger. His birthday, once filled with laughter, music, and friends, had turned into a nightmare of shadows, weapons, and relentless pursuit. The waitress held his hand tightly, guiding him toward the service ladder that could take them to an abandoned platform above. Her face was pale, lips pressed together, eyes sharp and alert. "We have to move slowly but quickly," she whispered. "One mistake and they'll catch us. You have to trust me." He nodded, muscles tense, heart pounding. The shadow ahead blocked the tunnel exit, and he realized they were cornered. The figure was tall, wearing dark clothes, the weapon gleaming faintly in the dim light. Its presence radiated threat and control. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Escape would not be easy, and the fear of what might happen if they failed pressed down on him like a physical weight. The waitress pressed herself against the wall, motioning him to stay low. "We need a distraction," she whispered. "I'll create it. When I do, you run for the ladder. Do you understand?" He swallowed hard, fear twisting his stomach, and nodded. I understand," he whispered, though his voice shook Dot with a sudden movement. She grabbed a loose metal pipe from the floor and threw it down the tunnel. The clang echoed loudly, bouncing off the walls. The shadow ahead snapped its head toward the sound, and for a brief moment, hesitation flickered across its stance. That was all the opening they needed. He bolted for the ladder, slipping slightly on the wet metal steps. Fear made his movements fast, desperate, his hands gripping the cold rungs. Behind him, he could hear footsteps, shouting, the sound of the shadow moving after them. Adrenaline surged through him, making his muscles burn but keeping him going. He climbed as fast as he could, ignoring the burning pain in his legs and arms. The waitress followed closely behind, her breath coming in sharp bursts. Together, they reached the abandoned platform above. The night air hit them like a shock. The platform was old, dusty, and poorly lit, with broken benches and scattered trash. The city stretched out in the distance, lights shimmering like stars on the ground. For a moment, it felt like safety, like a brief pause in the relentless nightmare. But the relief was short-lived. He could see shadows moving far below, figures tracking their escape. They weren't safe yet. Whoever was after them had anticipated this move, and the fear coiled tighter inside him. He pressed himself against a wall, trying to catch his breath, heart hammering. The city, once familiar, had become a labyrinth of fear, danger, and uncertainty. "Look," the waitress whispered, pointing toward the other end of the platform. A narrow stairwell led down to a street that appeared empty. "If we can reach that street, maybe we can blend in, disappear. But we have to move carefully. One wrong step." She didn't finish the sentence, but he understood. Death, or worse, was waiting if they made a mistake. They crept across the platform, every sense on high alert. The sound of the city below was faint, but comforting, cars moving. Distant voices, but the fear was never far. Shadows flickered at the edge of his vision, making him flinch at every turn. The adrenaline that had been sustaining him was now mingled with exhaustion. His body trembling from fear and strain. Suddenly, a faint click sounded behind them. He froze, heart leaping into his throat. The sound was soft, metallic, deliberate. Someone had followed them to the platform. They weren't alone. Fear tightened like a vice, making it hard to breathe. The waitress gestured for him to stay silent and press against a support beam. Through the dim light, he could see a figure moving along the platform, tall, silent, deliberate, carrying a weapon. The shadow seemed almost unreal, a ghostly menace in the night. Every instinct screamed to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go except forward. "Now," the waitress whispered, grabbing his arm. She led him toward the stairwell, moving quickly but quietly. The shadows below shifted, and he realized with a jolt that there were more than one figure following them. The fear that had been manageable moments ago now became crushing. They were surrounded by danger. And the night's horrors seemed endless as they reached the stairwell. A voice called out from below, deep and cold, "You can't hide. You'll pay for ignoring the warning." He froze, heart pounding. The voice sent a chill through him, a reminder of the poisoned drink. The chase through the streets, and the relentless pursuit that had followed. Every step, every breath. Every movement now carried a weight of life or death. The waitress pulled him down the narrow stairwell, pressing him against the wall as they descended into the faintly lit street below. The city was quiet, too quiet. And he realized that whoever was hunting them had control over every corner, every alley, every shadow. The danger wasn't random, it was planned, deliberate, and inescapable. I still remember that night. The street they had reached below the platform was dark and empty, but the shadows seemed alive. Every corner, every alley, every flicker of light could hide a threat. His chest felt tight, and his legs ached from the constant running, but fear gave him energy. The city, once familiar and safe, had become a maze of terror. He realized with a shiver that every step they had taken had been leading them here toward confrontation. The waitress held his hand tightly, guiding him forward, eyes scanning the shadows. Her face was pale, but her expression was fierce and determined. "We can't stop now," she whispered. "They've found us, and if we don't face this, it will never end. We have to find out why they're after you." He nodded silently, fear twisting his stomach, and followed her down the street. The dim glow of the streetlights barely lit their path. The city was quiet, too quiet, and that silence was heavier than any sound. He could feel the presence of the figures behind them, watching, waiting, patient, and cruel. Suddenly, one of the dark figures stepped out from an alleyway ahead, blocking their path. The weapon in his hand gleamed faintly under the flickering streetlight. The man's eyes were cold, cruel, and calculating. The air grew tense, heavy, like a storm about to break. "You shouldn't have ignored the warning," the man said, voice low and dangerous. "It was your choice, and now you'll pay for it." His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might explode. Every nerve in his body screamed to run, but he knew the street was narrow and escape seemed impossible. The waitress pressed herself closer to him, shielding him, her hand gripping his tightly. "We can do this," she whispered. "Stay calm. Follow my lead." The figure stepped closer, weapon raised. He could see the sharpness of the steel, the deadly intent in the man's eyes. Fear surged through him like fire, but beneath it a strange sense of clarity emerged. Survival wasn't just about running anymore. They had to face the danger, understand it, and outsmart it. From the shadows behind, two more figures appeared, flanking the man. Panic clawed at him, sharp and cold. The street had become a trap. There was no alley to hide in, no platform to climb, no shadows to disappear into. The city that had been a place of celebration hours earlier was now a hunting ground. And the hunters were patient, organized, and cruel. The waitress whispered urgently, "We need to talk to them. Find out why. Maybe there's a way to stop this without running forever." He swallowed hard, terror twisting his throat. But she was right, they couldn't keep running. They had to confront the truth, no matter how frightening it might be. The tallest figure stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You think talking will help?" he said, voice cold. "You're too late for that. Warnings were given. You ignored them. Now face the consequences." The waitress stepped forward, hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace. "We don't want trouble," she said. "But we need answers. Why him? Why tonight?" The figure's eyes flicked toward her, then back to him. A cruel smile touched his lips. "He's chosen. Some people are not meant to celebrate freely," he said. The meaning of the words twisted in his mind, sending a fresh wave of fear. "But it's not just me. Others will follow. You can't escape the plan." A sudden noise, a distant car horn, made the figures pause. It was a tiny distraction, but enough for the waitress to grab his arm and pull him to the side. "Now," she hissed. They darted into a narrow alley to the left, shadows swallowing them. The sound of pursuit returned immediately, echoing in the confined space. They ran as fast as they could, the walls of the alley pressing in, the cold stone biting their hands when they brushed against it. Every turn revealed another shadow, another threat. They were being hunted relentlessly, and the city offered no safety, no comfort, no mercy. Finally, they reached a dead-end narrow courtyard surrounded by tall brick walls. The shadows from earlier appeared at the entrance, blocking any escape. Panic gripped him like a vice. The realization hit hard. They had nowhere left to run. Every street, every alley, every platform had been anticipated. The night was closing in. The figures advanced slowly, deliberately, and the tallest one spoke again. "This ends tonight. He will learn what happens when warnings are ignored." The waitress stepped in front of him, eyes fierce. "No," she said firmly. "You won't touch him. Not tonight. Not ever." A tense silence fell. The city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. He felt fear and adrenaline mix in a dizzying storm. Every second stretched, every heartbeat thundered, every shadow loomed with menace. I still remember that night. The courtyard was silent, heavy with tension. The shadows that had been chasing them moved slowly, deliberately, like predators circling their prey. Every heartbeat felt deafening, every breath sharp with fear. The city around them seemed to disappear, the walls, the street. The distant lights saw, replaced by the immediate threat of the figures closing in. He pressed himself against the cold brick wall, knees trembling, chest heaving. His legs ached from running, his hands were scraped from clutching metal and stone. But fear gave him energy, sharper than pain. The waitress stood beside him, her eyes scanning every movement, her body tense and ready. Her hand tightened on his arm. "We can't let them corner us," she whispered. "We have to act." The tallest figure, the one who seemed to lead the group, stepped closer, weapon glinting faintly in the dim light. His eyes were cold, calculating. "You've ignored the warnings," he said, voice low, deliberate, full of menace. "Now there's no escape." He felt panic rise like a tidal wave. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide, to disappear, but the dead-end courtyard left no options. His mind raced desperately for any chance, any idea, any escape. But there was none. Fear twisted inside him, sharp and suffocating. The waitress leaned closer, whispering urgently, "We have to distract them. I'll draw them to the left. You find an exit on the right. Can you do it?" He nodded, voice barely a whisper. "I'll try." With a sudden shout, the waitress ran to the left, kicking over a stack of empty crates. The sound echoed in the courtyard, and the shadow's attention snapped to her. The tallest figure snarled, lunging toward her. That split second was all he needed. He darted to the right, scanning the walls for any possible escape. His eyes landed on a narrow staircase leading to a rooftop. It was steep, old, and unstable, but it was a chance. He grabbed the railing and began to climb, ignoring the pain in his arms and the fear in his chest. Behind him, he could hear the figures shouting, cursing and following the waitress, their focus divided. The roof was slippery from the earlier rain. He moved carefully, each step sending small pebbles clattering down to the street below. The city lights stretched out in the distance, a strange contrast to the terror surrounding him. He could see the dark figures moving below, searching, frustrated by his escape. Adrenaline made him feel almost weightless as he sprinted across the roof, heading toward another building where he might find safety. Suddenly, a shadow appeared above him. A figure had followed him onto the roof. The weapon glinted in the dim light, and for a second, fear paralyzed him. He realized the night had prepared them for this moment. The attackers had anticipated every escape route, every move. Survival was no longer just about speed, was about cleverness, timing, and luck. He spotted a fire escape ladder leading to the street below. It was a risky jump, but it was his only chance. He took a deep breath, heart pounding, and leaped, landing awkwardly on the wet pavement. Pain shot through his legs, but he pushed forward, sprinting into the maze of streets. The city that had once been familiar now felt alien, full of dangers and shadows. From behind, he could hear shouting and the sound of pursuit. The figures weren't giving up. They were relentless, patient, and cruel. Fear gnawed at him, but he refused to stop. Survival demanded movement, and movement meant everything as he ran. He remembered the warning at the restaurant, the poisoned drink, the waitress shouting, "Stop." The sense of danger he had ignored. Every detail came back with clarity. Someone had planned this meticulously. Someone wanted him gone, and they had allies everywhere. The realization made his stomach twist with dread. Suddenly, a hand grabbed his shoulder from behind. He spun, heart leaping into his throat, but it wasn't one of the attackers. The waitress appeared, pulling him into a narrow doorway. "Quick, in here," she hissed. They ducked inside, pressing against the wall, barely breathing. The sounds of pursuit echoed past them in the street, then faded. For a moment, silence fell. He pressed his back to the cold wall, chest heaving, legs shaking. We're still alive," he whispered, disbelief and fear mixing in his voice. The waitress shook her head, eyes alert. "Not yet. We've survived the first wave. But they'll come back. They won't stop until they get what they want. And we still don't know why." I still remember that night. The city seemed quieter now, but the tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Every street, every alley, every shadow seemed to whisper danger. His legs were sore, his chest burned from running, and fear still wrapped itself around him like a heavy cloak. But beneath the fear, a strange sense of determination had begun to rise. He could not let the night's horrors win. He had to survive to find the truth, to end this nightmare. The waitress held his hand tightly, guiding him through narrow streets, every step cautious. "We can't let them corner us again," she said softly. "We need to find a safe place and figure out why this is happening. Then, maybe, we can end it tonight." He nodded silently, heart still pounding. Every detail of the night came back to him: the birthday dinner, the waitress shouting, "Stop," the poisoned drink, the shadows, the alleys, the chase. It all pointed to a single, terrifying fact. Someone had wanted him gone from the start. And they had gone to great lengths to make it happen. They reached a quiet courtyard, dimly lit by a single streetlight. The shadows of the pursuing figures were nowhere to be seen. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, to feel the faint relief that maybe, just maybe, the immediate danger had passed. But the night wasn't finished. From the darkness emerged a single figure, different this time. Calm, composed, older, and not immediately threatening. The figure raised a hand in greeting. "You don't understand yet?" he said quietly. "I didn't want to scare you unnecessarily, but you needed to see the truth. The night, the threats, the chase, it was a test, a warning." He froze, confusion and fear mixing. A test, a warning. What did it mean? The figure continued, voice steady. "Years ago, someone close to you made a decision that put you in danger without your knowledge. The people chasing you tonight, they were remnants of that past. I intercepted them before they could do more serious harm, but you had to face the fear to understand, to be ready." He felt his stomach twist. The birthday, the drink, the tarot wasn't random. It was a message, a signal, a lesson disguised as a nightmare. He couldn't fully comprehend it, but he felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. The waitress spoke for the first time in a moment. "It's over for now," she said softly. "You survived. That's what matters. We can figure out the rest tomorrow." He leaned against the wall, exhausted, shaking, tears stinging his eyes. The adrenaline slowly drained, leaving him raw, aware, alive. "I don't know how to thank you," he whispered. "You don't need to," she replied. "You survived. That's enough. And remember, life can change in a second. You just need to keep moving forward." For the first time since the night began, he felt something like peace. The danger hadn't fully vanished, he knew that, but he had survived. And he had learned the power of courage, trust, and resilience. The city, once a place of terror, felt a little less threatening. And a little more alive, as they walked away from the courtyard. The lights of the city reflecting in puddles on the street. He realized the truth. Fear could chase you, terror could stalk you, and shadows could hide everywhere, but life was about moving forward. No matter how terrifying the night might be, if you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Life can change in an instant, and sometimes surviving the night is the first step toward understanding the mysteries that surround us.